We're going to be moving into a phase where we're rewriting every business process and organization over the next 3 to 5 years. I firmly believe that.
Okay, so 11% to 33%, literally in 1 quarter.
1 quarter.
With 90% moving out of kind of POC phase or
out of experimentation into POC or deploy.
Okay, those are pretty firm statistics. So we're not just riding the lightning at the hype curve right now. This is actually turning into practical, not just theoretical.
With agentic AI, we actually see the potential to do what Steve was alluding to, which is actually rewrite the way you do the work entirely by using a similar technology, but applied differently.
So on the topic of AI, AI agents, they're rapidly moving, right? In a very fast way from things theoretical, right? So very academic and possible to things that are actually practical within the enterprise. So what are the most significant forces that are driving this shift? And what fundamental changes do you believe AI agents will bring about in how work is structured and executed in organizations? And Steve, I am going to start with you because you have a broad remit at KPMG and you see organizations of all size and scale on this one.
Yeah. So first off, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. Let's start with where you started, which is this is happening. It's right now. You know, a year ago at this time, if you were in a lot of people's project meeting, the word agent wasn't the first topic, right? And you don't go into a conversation today where it's not about agent. And for those of us running large programs or helping people run large programs, you know, we're starting to get into a real strong hype cycle right now, right? So you got to know what we're talking about and where we're talking about it. And so that ends up being an issue if you're running the program you got to deal with, right? Like, so everybody wants to talk agents and most people asking the question haven't used one and don't necessarily know what we're talking about. With that said, we do a regular pulse survey. So we do it quarterly. And in that pulse survey, you know, companies, we saw it emerge in the first quarter, the fourth quarter of last year that a lot of companies were starting to experiment with agents. And then they were beginning to move into POCs. Well, in our most recent one that we went from 11% of companies saying they deployed agents to 33% of companies, they've deployed these agents, right? So we're seeing 3X on that, and 90% have moved out of experimentation into POC land, right? So it's coming in a lot of organizations. And what do I think the reason for all that is? Well, there's a couple of things. Augmentation is really hard. AI augmentation programs are really hard. Training people to think differently, to use this new tool, use it. It doesn't necessarily materialize where they're doing their work. This is different. I can materialize it in the platforms. The enterprise platforms are also making tremendous investments, not unlike what Workday's been doing. So now I can find it in the course and flow of work, and all of our work with our own platforms, where I can put the AI in the platform, or I can put it in the flow of work. It makes a tremendous difference in terms of adoption and all that. And so, you know, in turn, there's a long question, but you also asked me like how you prepare the organization for these things. And I think one of the things is you really got to think about the amount of time you're going to put into the training and the change in that you're going to be doing, because it's incredibly important. We're rewriting every business process. We're going to be, I'll end on this point. We're going to be moving into a phase where we're rewriting every business process and organization over the next 3 to 5 years. I firmly believe that. I don't know if everybody agrees with that, and that's not science fiction. The pace of this change and the opportunity with it is so large. That's what we've got to give. That's how we're trying to prepare organizations. So,
okay, so 11% to 33%, literally in 1 quarter.
1 quarter.
With 90% moving out of kind of POC phase or
out of experimentation into POC or deploy.
Okay, those are pretty firm statistics. So we're not just riding the lightning at the hype curve right now.
Right.
This is actually turning into practical, not just theoretical.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll add 2 things, Joe, which I think are relevant. One is, if you just rewound not long ago, 3 years ago or less, we would have been up here talking about generative AI, right? ChatGPT burst on the scene, that's what you'd be talking about. And it hasn't been very long, and since then, we're now talking about agentic AI. And if you have a chance, I'm going to talk more about that shift in the theater session later. So if you have a chance to join, that's great. But I won't go into too many details there. But I think the key thing is, with generative AI, what we saw were features in product. We saw things that helped you a little bit, write a job description for you, generate some learning content. And a lot of people just use those as tools alongside what they do with work, either using something like ChatGPT or Gemini and Docs, wherever the case is. So it gave you an incremental boost. with agentic AI, we actually see the potential to do what Steve was alluding to, which is actually rewrite the way you do the work entirely by using a similar technology but applied differently. So one thing that's driving this is that we found more powerful applications of the technology, and that's what we're working on. They're more complex in a lot of ways to implement, and so that's part of what's happening in the speed, the speed at which we're going. And then the second part of it is really driven by people. So on two fronts. So for me as a developer of AI, I've never seen in my career, I've been through a number of technology shifts, mobile, cloud, obviously in AI now. The amount of human effort that goes into this. So for instance, in the open source community, how quickly tool adoption is, the alternatives that you have available to you, the speed with which your IT teams or your vendor teams, whomever they are, can adopt and deploy new technologies. And that's because people are driving this. People are creating software to support all of this, including the models. And then on the other side of the people is what you were talking about, which is the appetite from CIOs, from heads of IT, from all the business functions to actually adopt these technologies is incredible. Even more so than what we saw with generative AI. So I think those are the two other parts that I would add.
Yeah. And if I just finish off on that, and one of the reasons is because almost everybody, every survey we've ever done, and so we've done 6 of these pulse surveys, has never really changed, that the business leaders, the most senior business leaders perceive that this is going to dramatically change their industry. And right now they're assessing it over the course of the next 2 years, 87% or something like that. Say that, I mean, that maps to what I'm seeing out there as well, is there's a lot of concern about getting left behind. And it's right, because this pace of change is quite high, and it's not so easy to just step on the bus, or get on the train wherever you, when you think the time is right.
Yeah, it's more than just a technology decision, right? It's a general, broader decision of people, process, and technology all coming together. And I know that refrain sounds like super common because we've been saying it for a long time. But I think at this inflection point, you really have to think about the trifecta making this change happen. You talked about this idea of business processes potentially being rewritten writ large across organizations, which is a perfect segue into the second question I have. We'll start it again with you, Steve.
Yeah.
Which is AI agents. They're not just automating tasks,
Right.
We're not thinking about like a bot and if then this, then that kind of a model. They're changing the very nature of work. And I know that sounds a little hyperbolic, so let's break that down. And I want to ask, how do you see roles and responsibilities evolving for human workers, you, me, and everybody else in this room, especially in those knowledge-sensitive fields, and what new skills will be most in demand, and how can organizations prepare their workforces for that situation?
So first off, that's really near and dear to my heart, right? We have a lot of, everybody who works at KPMG is a knowledge worker, basically. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about that problem, which is how is this going to affect what they do? And how do we get them ready to do that, whatever that set of things we've assessed is, and do it in a time when change is at a pace that we've not really experienced before. So the last thing that you thought you were working on, oh, wait a second, this next thing is actually changes that idea, right? So one is, we're really transparent. This is a feature of this era and not a bug. Change, right? It is also, we go into it with the empathy that says this is the hardest thing, is for people to change, especially like, this idea of fundamentally changing what they do. Like, a lot of people's identity is wrapped up in that. So I often say, make sure you have enough investment in the deployment. And I will say, historically, organizations tend to, that's the part of the budget that maybe is on the chopping line, early. I mean, where we have better deployment capabilities in our organization, we have much better usage and much better results, right? And when we work with clients, it's the same, right? Where there's existing capabilities to train and to rethink and to be able to make that mind shift change and make enough space for it, much more success. So a couple of thoughts in there. And then, I just want to say something on the skills. I think there's some set of skills, like right now it's highly in demand, AI skills, especially, and most organizations are worried they don't have the tech skills for this. We're starting to see emergence of, but I need somebody who knows AI in finance, or I need to know AI. I've been there, done that. Well, there's not that many people who've been there, done that yet, right? And so we need to be investing in training those folks, in that mindset about, we call it an AI first mindset. Yeah. That's really hard to do too, because if I've never done it before, but like I can use AI to solve this problem. Because when agents show up, they scale intelligence horizontally, maybe. I don't just have an agent that can do something, but I have the ability to scale that horizontally. And when I can do that, I can solve the problem that I would have had to sample. Well, no, I can go get a full data set, right? We don't think that way. We're going to be agent bosses. In fact, you'll have agent employees that'll work for you that you're going to need to sustain like you would a traditional employee. That sounds a little science fiction-y, and I know that was one of the things, but that's inside of, that's not very far out in terms of when that's going to be happening. So you're going to need to train people to be an agent boss.
Right.
And guess what? Good news is that looks a little bit like being a boss anyway.
Sure.
Probably be a little difficult when you realize, and I'm also being managed by an agent at times. That'll be a mind shift change, but that's coming as well.
Yeah, that's a big peel, man. Look, you made a statement early on in that kind of response that really struck a chord, which is a lot of people's identities are wrapped up
And what they do.
in what they do. It kind of reminds me of that funny scene from Office Space. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but the two Bobs are asking the guy, like, what do you do here? He's like, I'm a people person, right? Like, okay, that's cool and stuff. But the idea is like, what are you actually doing beyond what you think is adding value? And I wonder too, if the narrative hasn't been actually focused at the kind of the end or domain user, right? Which is, I don't think any of us, especially those that operate on the spectrum of integrity, ever feel like we ever get it all done, right? We have this time apportioned for work and we go home every single day not having gotten it done.
Yeah.
So then what's the promise of an agentic future? What's the promise of more AI that allows us to move quicker and with more efficacy through those tasks of the day, which I think is going to be super fascinating. So Shane, you've discussed the concept in a bit of a shift here because you talked about agents as employees, usually agents as bosses. Okay, let's table that one, Steve. But Shane, you've talked about this concept of an agent system of record. So can you explain the core principles of what that means and why it's essential for managing those agents across enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with what Steve was just talking about. If you think about, what was the workforce that drove all of your businesses going, looking back. Of course, it's you who are here and all the people that you work with. People drive it, and that's not going away, but it's being joined by a digital workforce that's going to work alongside. And in different functions, that's going to look different. Sometimes it's going to be working right alongside you. So, for me, I'm a software developer in AI. So most of my team are software engineers, and all of them use code assist now with models. Yep. And they have to do it. And this actually speaks to one thing I was going to add to what you asked before. What skills do you actually need to think about? I think in whatever function you're in, you need to think about the skill of working effectively with AI tools. Yep. So whether that's learning how to prompt them, how to integrate them with your work, how to delegate away as much as you can. If you don't do that, you're going to fall behind if you have productive agents in your work area. So you want to really be able to make use of these tools. It doesn't mean necessarily your role will be irrelevant, but it may change, right? And certainly the productivity that will be expected from a role that has these AI capabilities will be higher than it was before. Just like when we measure productivity with our engineers who are using Code Assist really well, it's around a 30% gain that they can get. And we expect that to continue to rise over time as the tools get more powerful, as the humans get better and better at using those tools. But it does not replace what the person's doing. Things like complex system design, systems integration, all the places where you have the most thorny things in software development, that's where we want the minds of our people and having them, the Code Assist, just get there faster. Where does the system of record come in? Well, whatever agents you have that are performing some of these functions in your enterprise, because they are like a digital workforce that's joining your human workforce in one of many ways, maybe directly alongside, maybe doing things instead, because you can do that to focus on more strategic things, you want to manage those things. They are doing things that are a little bit different than the way you might have thought of AI before. So for me, I go back about 6 years at Workday, and they're essentially from the growth of machine learning and AI being zero at Workday to where it is today, which is at really large scale, billions of records, tens of millions of users and so on. When you look at that, before, the real concern around something like doing AI was, okay, data access. We're going to take data out of a tenant and we're going to use it to train. That was a concern, and we've dealt with that in platform. Today with agents, your concern is about agents having real-time access to data in your enterprise. And you control that for people using systems of record like Workday or other systems, but you need to now control that for agents. You can't restrict them too much, otherwise you don't get the value. But you do want to have the same controls in place in order to prevent them from exfiltrating data accidentally. And you think about what could happen. So if you have an employee, whether it's unintentional or if it was a malicious act or whatever it is, trying to do something with your data that they shouldn't, they're operating in human time. They can only do so much. But if you turn a powerful AI system loose, it's operating literally billions of times faster than a human being can operate. So With a system of record, you really want to have tight control of these agents. You want to give your IT team the ability to turn these things on and off, the managers who are managing them. You want to see where they fit in the organizational hierarchy so that you know where they're adding value, who's actually getting the value from them. You want to measure their efficacy just like you do an employee, right? They onboard when they come in and train and tune. They offboard when you make sure that there's no data present in those agents if you decide you don't want to use them anymore. So all of these reasons that are very, very much analogous to what you would have with a human workforce and a human employee are present for agents. And because these systems are less like features and more like workers, they're more skill and role-based and less like a feature and product, they match much more directly to the way Workday already manages your human workforce. And that's really what the system of record is all about, giving you control and transparency.
It is pretty fascinating. I mean, if we think about the parallels between our personal lives and what we do kind of at work and business, right, just writ large, irrespective of industry, there's almost like this chasm that we need to cross, that it's fully possible. And we always have these incredible experiences outside of work where there's this human machine pairing has already happened in spades.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't know very many people anymore that buy the maps go every year and like to actually like plot their route and print the instructions to get from here to Timbuktu, right?
Yeah.
And so we've already crossed that bridge. We've already decided that, you know what, these systems that can think infinitely faster than me can then guide me to where I need to be. All right, so Shane, you also highlighted the importance of an AI-driven agent interface.
Yeah.
Okay, this is probably new parlance for a lot of the folks that are going to be listening to this. So
Sure.
how does that interface differ from a traditional user interface? And what role does it play in enabling seamless interaction between those agents, human workers, and other enterprise systems?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the key things, which I touched on in the previous answer, is what these agents do that's a little bit different than what AI's features did in last generation, right? So these are things that we really want operating, in many cases, in near real time inside your system, and doing the kinds of things that maybe a human worker would have done in the past. I'll use Workday as the example. This applies more broadly, but I'll use Workday as the example. So, today, if you want to complete a business process in Workday, something very simple, let's just say booking time off or signing up for benefits or something like that. How does that happen? Well, you have this high reliability system of record, and it generates a UI to a person, depending on how you're configured, and a person presses buttons and selects values, right? That's what they do. That's how you operate on Workday. And when you do that, Workday intakes that data, it does the appropriate action, it sends you a confirmation, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's what happens. Well, that was the interface. It's the UI that you saw on your screen. That's not the right interface for an agent to do that. If you want to have an agent book time off for you, you don't want it to actually be doing screen crawling. That's something you may have seen in some early demos, depending on what your roles are. Using that is really a workaround for what you want. You don't really want an agent going and looking at your screen and then using computer vision in order to go and complete actions. It's brittle, it's slow, it doesn't scale well. It's a modality we use a little bit, but it's not the predominant one that's emerging. It's not really where we expect the industry to go. Where we expect it to go is to interfaces that are designed specifically for an agent to be able to do things quickly, reliably, for more than one agent to be able to operate. And so you'll hear about things like, you may have heard, depending on what your role type is, if you're in IT, you may have heard of something called MCP, Model Context Protocol. It's an open source protocol that was released by Anthropic. There's another one called Agent to Agent. That's a Google-sponsored open source protocol. It's emerging. MCP, think of it more for a model to a tool. A tool for agents is just any auxiliary system, whether it's running a web search or whether it's operating on Workday. That's a tool for an agent. And then Agent to Agent, more for agents to be able to interact with each other. And so these interfaces, driven by these protocols, are the emerging standard. And as an organization, if you want agents to be able to do things like, I just described some business processes, maybe much more complicated business processes like in recruiting or financial audit or some of the other areas that you've heard about, contract intelligence, you have to build interfaces that are designed specifically for the agent to be able to operate. And that's what that really is all about. It's going to differ depending on what your organization is, what you do, and how your technology is set up. But the key thing is you are now designing this for a type of interoperability between systems, your existing system of record or set of them, and these agent systems that are emerging. And that's just a new interaction that we haven't had. And so it requires a new interface. That's really what that's all about, is making your technology interoperate with agents in the way that gets the best value from them and most reliably.
Okay. So Steve, you've seen this kind of play out in real time. You've seen the surveys, you've seen the adoption, you've seen the move to not just experimentation, but something real. What should we be doing right now to be ready for this type of a leap, if you will?
Yeah, well, one of the things, just building off this this idea of the agent interface, is thinking about what that means to your whole ecosystem. partnerships? Like, if you're in the room, I'm assuming you're working with Workday, and then you likely have other systems that you work with as well. How are they all going to fit together into what it is that you want out of your enterprise? One of the things I worry about a lot, and we'll probably get to, is about agent sprawl. I'm not sure I want thousands of agents necessarily. I don't know. I don't know exactly. Like, I think it's to be written what exactly is going to be happening with a large orchestrator agent potentially up above them and is actually working with them. But I want to have flexibility, and I don't want somebody trapping my data behind my data behind a wall that they've built and not being able to get access to it. So we're talking about MCP, my ability to allow the agents I do build to get in behind and go access data that they need to go get and work with it. That's super important to me. That agent to agent interface, so that my agents can work with other agents potentially, assuming that that's going to be built that way. And I know it, I mean, that's something that we're planning to support. And I think underneath that is, we're going to get to this question of data. And because AI without data is not nearly what it can be. I mean, we got a lot of benefit before we started putting data in, materially data, bring your own data, but AI with data is on a different level, right? And then agents with data and access to data, we're actually able to really do something.
So this is actually a nice segue to the next question, which is very data centric.
Yeah.
So data access, it's security, it's ethical considerations. Let's wrap it in a big bow of responsible AI. We know it's paramount as agents start to enter the workforce, but also proliferate through the workforce. So what are the biggest challenges organizations are facing from your lens around maybe a data governance strategy, specifically a framework for agents?
Let me zoom back out on data. So I was just talking about data. Most organizations, I'm sure it's nobody in this audience, but most organizations entered the agentic phase and the AI phase before that with a data investment that was underway and not complete, and wish it were further along, right? You inherit whatever you inherit when you do one of these programs. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of investments, a lot of no regrets investments in getting data structured and ready, accessible, and well governed. I think you have to do the same thing when you step back on AI. In a world with agents coming, and whatever version of that is going to look like, and I think that's still to be written, is you got to have a control plane, a control structure that's based on a set of guidelines and principles that you've developed, and that you have a team that's operating that, that understands it, and that is staying ahead of what we said was a feature of this thing, which is change, right? Agent-to-agent protocol didn't exist in January, right? MCP didn't exist in June necessarily out in the wild. So in June of last year. So these things are changing at a reasonably fast pace, and that opens up all these new things. Well, you got to have a governance structure that flexes into that and knows that that's going to be part of it, right? If you talk about those guardrails that you put up and the things that you put in place are going to be the things that let you go fast, not the speed bumps that slow you down. You will go much slower without those things in place. And as we move into it, we haven't talked a lot about the difference between autonomy versus, like semi or low level of autonomy. The more you move into autonomy, and that's we consider those like collaborators or orchestrators. Those control systems are like, that's the gold that lets you get there.
Yep, fair enough. I hear a lot of themes or thematics around trust. Yeah. I hear a lot of thematics around making sure that you're moving in a deliberate fashion. And as we wrap in this, and before we get to Q&A, I'd love to maybe end on maybe this kind of final question, which is a bit more holistic and not necessarily tech focused, but I think it's actually transcendent, which is around this idea of leadership. So this kind of transformation, again, another word that's been probably used a little bit too much, it calls for a different kind of leadership. And so I'm going to ask you both, let's get away from this kind of boundary of incremental, super slow. Yeah, we're doing stuff, but are we really painting the walls doesn't move the wall? What if we flip the script a little bit? Okay, what if we push people to say, okay, let's stop focusing on doing things better and start focusing on doing better things? And so here's the question. How do we move away from those small, safe steps as we think about this future? And what would you like leaders to leave with? What's that big advice here, kind of rapid fire? Shane, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So the first thing I think is when you're thinking about what should be different, I would look at places where a business process is designed the way it is because of human limitations or designed around what people do today. And then decide, is that the way it should be, or is it that way, but it could be better? I'm going to use financial audit as the example. I use this one a lot because I think it's a great example. Financial audits are required. They are high risk. They are expensive. And much of the process today is designed around limitations people have. You have to spot check. There are billions of records in a large general ledger. But a person that wanted to conduct this audit and had an agent at its disposal to do that could potentially examine every single record, right? A person can only look through so much documentation, in a reasonable amount of time. You can put all of that into a context window for a large language model and have it have all of that at the ready for you. So things like this, where the current way that the business process is designed, how you come in and then plan an audit, then ask for information, then do spot checks, could be completely revolutionized if you just think, well, that's a human limitation. Can I get around that? So that to me is a big one. And then the flip side of that is, and you say like think big as leaders. I would encourage, I've spent a lot of time talking to customers over the last couple of years about how they can adopt AI faster. So not what's new and coming out in roadmap. I talk about that a lot too. But hey, with what's here, how can we adopt it faster? Yeah. I think that risk tolerance is really important. I think that it's being like very, very thoughtful and intentional about either deciding that risk tolerance is low, and that's a decision you make, or deciding that, hey, our risk tolerance has to be different. Our profiling of this has to be different. And then helping the organization adopt a higher risk tolerance in order to be able to adopt these technologies. And there's ways to mitigate that. But that's really a people-driven thing, which is always what I find interesting, right? So, I work a lot in technology. I'm in the engine room most of the time at Workday building stuff. But I pop my head out a lot to talk to customers. And then you realize like a lot of the bottlenecks that are there are really driven by us as people and how we're going to adopt. So I think as a leader, being willing to say, hey, yeah, let's sign up for a little bit of risk here. I'm not going to gamble your whole business on this, but there's no reward without risk. And so being able to tolerate risk is big, and thinking about where are humans limiting this process. Those are my two pieces of advice.
Okay. All right. So Steve, what's that one big advice you would give to the leaders in the room and those who are listening to the podcast as well, in terms of how they take advantage of this moment that we're in?
So first off, Shane, it was such a great story about audit. That is exactly what our Clara platform does. Is one of the things is we take full extract of the journal entries we where we would have used to have sampled, and actually is materially changed quality, right? So that we're able, and pace and insights that we're able to deliver. Okay, so my one big one is you need to be doing this is an enterprise transformation, and those are tough, right? And you have to have that mindset. This is an enterprise transformation. However you're approaching it, you're either doing it correctly or not. You're either being great at it, or you're being fabulous, or you're somewhere in between. But it is happening across the enterprise. Every bit of the organization has this. If there's not a central, control tower somewhere that's helping ensure that the lessons learned in one place and the tech decisions and other things, you need to have that in place. And I'm going to call that faster horses. And then, because you're going to be in making processes better, et cetera. So faster horses, that's really important to be doing. There needs to be some money set aside to be doing to be tackling the innovator's dilemma piece, which is we are in a moment of disruption, not transformation. What I mean by that is iconic brands don't necessarily make it through disruption. Winners and losers are being rewritten. There's plenty of business case examples of companies that got disruption right and ended up winning. There's others where brand you would never think who had all the advantages didn't get through there. I'm just suggesting there ought to be enough money. And I know not everyone in this room can go execute on it, but think about it is, are we spending a certain amount of our investment dollars on thinking about the future of how we make product, how we deliver product in a way that would be uniquely different and you would never have come up with if these advantages of AI and agents and other things weren't part of the delivery model or weren't part of the mechanisms.